Well, why don't we start today's Quakerism 101, the final in the series on witness living in the light, with some moments of silence. Thank you, friends. So the structure of today's presentation will be fairly similar to Worship and Ministry, which was the previous in the series, in that we'll watch a short video uh, presentation by Nadine Hoover and consider a query uh, that arises, at least for me, from the video. Um, and it, one of the things that she does is she shares a number of quotes, but one of the ones that I like the most is from William Penn, who says, "True godliness does not turn us out of the world, but enables us to live better in it, and excites our endeavors to mend it." Um, and so you'll hear that quote in this video, which I'll share along with a couple other quotes, one from George Fox and one from uh, John Wallman. But you'll also hear Nadine talk a little bit about the structure of witness and some of the ways in which Quaker witness arises out of our testimonies and from what she calls the great experiment of the Spirit moving within us. Um, and so let's hear Nadine's words. But before that, Liz, do you want to introduce her because this is someone you know, right?
Yeah, it's somebody I've known for quite a while. Nadine Hoover is a friend who spent much of her life in Indonesia and working first in Indonesia and then marrying an Indonesian and having a couple of daughters there. And got involved in the she was brought up a Quaker, and she got involved in the Friends Peace Team's effort in Asia, and spent a great deal of time working in Asia on alternatives to violence and Peace Team works, um, particularly with trauma, relieving trauma, using nonviolence as a way to help people relieve trauma. So she's got, a really interesting background. Um, this series of videos was created, and I heartily anybody who wants to can look at these 6 or 7 videos. I can't remember whether it was 6 or 7 that were created because she has a basic sense of what Quakerism is. Now, it's not the only sense of what Quakerism is, but it was a feeling that we needed something updated from the Quakerism 101 that we've been doing all this time. The thing that Philadelphia Yearly Meeting did, and especially that we needed something that was done with video. But there's also a workbook that has queries and things. We don't have that. I think we probably should order it for the meeting. Um, and so I and she spoke to our yearly meeting a number of years ago about leadings. Nadine did, and she's really a consummate friend, is what I would call her. Someone who really has followed the light in her life. With that, I think she'll speak for herself very well.
Thanks, Liz. So I'll share my screen. About a little under 10 minutes. So let's watch Nadine and then come back together.
Quaker structure of bearing witness to the living spirit. So that might seem a little odd. We don't usually think of bearing witness as a structure, but substance offers one of the most primary structures in our lives as Quakers. When older and younger friends are organizing together, we don't organize around whatever the adult says goes, and we don't organize around whatever the kid wants goes. We organize around the structure of love and truth of the matter. And so I think this is why Quakers, speak plainly and discourage elaborating or defending or persuading. We lay out the truth as our best sense of it, of the truth, and let that love and truth work on us. And that creates its own structure. I've noticed that Quakers have often said to me too, it's hard to pin down. I can't quite figure out what witness is or what it means. And I think because maybe there's some very different, distinct ways in which we do it. One is that in our outward forms, our outward forms, we shape our outward forms to reflect our inward experience. Another is through relationships and through loving and conscientious relationships with other people and with the natural world. And another way is just the fruits of the experiment with the Spirit in our lives. The joy, the love, the beauty, the strength and compassion, the equality and liberty of this life and experimenting with the Spirit in our lives. So our witness appears in a number of different ways. It also has a few different sides, a couple different sides. So we're mixing both the witness of what it is we're illuminating, opposing, resisting, that is contrary to the Spirit, that's degenerative, but also following and yielding into the guidance of the Spirit and that which is regenerative. Quakers love to think about walking cheerfully over the world, answering that of God and everyone. But the full quote from George Fox is much more challenging and demanding and to some people disturbing. So let me read the Fox quote. In the power and life of wisdom and dread of the Lord God of life and heaven and earth dwell, that in the wisdom of God over all ye may be preserved, and be a terror to all the adversaries of God, and a dread, answering that of God in them, spreading the truth abroad, awakening the witness, confounding deceit, gathering up out of transgressions into the life, the covenant of light and peace with God. All nations hear the word by sound or writing. Spare no place, spare no tongue nor pen, but be obedient to God and go through the world, and be valiant for the truth upon the earth. Tread and trample under all that is contrary, and this is a charge to you all, in the presence of the living God. Be patterns, be examples in all countries, places, islands, nations, wherever you come, that your carriage in life may preach among all sorts of people and to them. And then you will come to walk cheerfully over the world, answering that of God and everyone. So, I think that that's it's really important for us as friends to hear the entire quote. So I put the emphasis on then at the end, right? We don't seek to walk cheerfully over the world answering that of God and everyone. We seek to yield into the truth in all of its sort of petty and overwhelming and inconvenient and disruptive demands in every aspect of our life. You know, we seek to act justly and love mercy and to walk humbly with our God. And the problem with that is that truth is often not what we like. It's not what we agree with. It's not what we want. It's not what we understand, right? It's messy and it's uncomfortable. It's not comfortable being a terror to the adversaries of God, treading and trampling under everything that's contrary, right? But honestly, that's what a lot of the work of witness feels like. You know, I often want to give up or give in, or I don't hold the course when we get into these white waters, when you have to really confront that which is wrong. I don't know how many times I've heard Quakers say, I don't like confrontation, and I don't know how we do it. But I was saying to a friend recently, don't think of it as confrontation, think of it as illumination. Think of it as an invitation to seeing and an invitation into resisting and opposing together. But even in the most disturbing and distressing of our human affairs, William Penn kind of pointed out that true godliness doesn't take us out of the world. It enables us to live better in it. And he says it excites our endeavors to mend it. I think that's what he says. So when we yield and rely on the Spirit through all of these trials of our lives, and we enter our insights into public record, into letters or writings or art or music or curriculum or law or court or wherever we are entering our testimony, then others see us also as witnesses, both in the day-to-day life of things, but also in the legal form of the court, right? Quakers are very committed to creating and following law, unless that law violates our conscience or religious conviction. And then we know that we are obligated to break that law in public in a way that we can enter our objection into the court record. And that is a very important part of creating the beloved community. Each have our own ways of being patterns of examples. There's a richness of the way witness presents, and we each have our own, right? There was another quote that I'd like to read to you from John Wallman. We each have our own way, but we need to be careful that we don't just settle into what's comfortable or suitable or doesn't confront the adversaries to God. So I want to read you the John Wallman quote. He wrote, oppression in the extreme appears terrible, but oppression in more refined appearances remains oppression. And where the smallest degree of it is cherished, it grows stronger and more extensive. To labor for a perfect redemption from this spirit of oppression is the greatest business of the whole family of Christ Jesus in this world. So as friends, we rely on the substance of the inward guide and the love and the truth of a matter to provide the primary structure for our lives and for our communities. As friends, when we rely on that substance in all of its texture and what appears to be good, what appears to be bad, within all the struggle and trials of it, then we see the structure of love and truth that love and truth create. We see the structure of the relationships of communion and mutual discernment. And when we get there, there is this incredible delight and joy and playfulness, a sense of liberty that is totally worth all of the challenges and really can't be found in any other way.
Thanks, Liz, for introducing this series to us. Um, the question that we'd like to pose is an open one, and that is, can you think of and share a time when, as Penn put it, you were you had your excited your endeavors to mend the world, um, uh, and if anyone would like to share that, that'd be great. One of the things that I really like about the message that we heard from Nadine Hoover is the word experiment, and the words yield to the truth, and the idea that what we're about is illuminating, an invitation to seeing. These are not necessarily the sort of words that you might associate with a struggle for what's righteous and just in the world. But they ring true, and to me anyway. I'll stop talking now and see if anyone wants to share something in your own life, in your own relationships, in your own experiment of the Spirit moving through you, where it's been important to act in the world.
I was curious about she brought up the law, written into law, this kind of thing. Now, if, I don't know what to call it, but empire, if it's the government or something like that, I don't know how to put this. How do you fight certain things with the government that are not true? How do you illuminate that kind of thing?
I hesitate to suggest that I know how to answer that question, but I wonder, I see Larry has his hand raised, and I wonder if we just gather some thoughts and continue the conversation that way. Larry?
Yeah, my observation is that worship leads to action, and not the other way around. Action does not lead to worship. And I have found that what I am led to is to being politically active. And I have noticed that most of my efforts produce very small results. Sometimes I can't see that there have been any results, but often I do see small results of my political actions. And what I've observed is that people who are not led to action see political action as fuel because they don't see results. They don't see results because they don't look at the results. And I think one reason many people are not led to action is that they don't proceed from a spiritual basis. And without a spiritual basis, there's no there. There's no grounding. There's no polar star to guide us. Oh, just one other thing. The other thing I've observed is that people prefer a good story to the truth. Or not, maybe not everyone, but a large swath of people prefer a good story to the truth.
Yeah, or they believe whatever they hear and they don't look any further.
I kind of wonder what Walter has to say, because his life has been, it seems like, working very much so in the arena of active change, in the, with justice and politics and the justice system.
Okay.
Sorry to call you out there, Walter.
Oh, no. Yeah, and actually, I'm glad you did. And in the moment you did, it sort of this thing came to mind, which I kind of I think is relevant to what Irene was asking, and something has motivated me throughout my career, and that is, this is fairly intense. Okay, there's there's a collection of lynching photographs called "Without Sanctuary." And some of you are probably familiar with them. They came out around the year 2000, maybe a little earlier. And it's a huge collection of photographs that were, well, it's a huge collection of postcards is what it is, with photographs of lynchings on the front, and the traditional space on the back for address and for short letters. And they were distributed in 5 and dime stores around the turn of the last century. And white folk bought them and sent them to the relatives around the country whenever they're traveling. They'd put a little note on the back. And some of these, if you go to the website for Without Sanctuary, which is still there, if you click on some of the images, which I don't necessarily recommend that people go and look at it because it's absolutely horrifying. But if you click on some of the images, the backs of the cards are revealed, and the sort of just common notes that people were putting there about how they were visiting this place and they were having a good time and hoping that Uncle Bob is okay. What went on the cover is a charred body of an African American man. So one of those images is of a lynching that occurred in 1911 in Okemo, Oklahoma, which was of a woman in her 30s and her son who was 14, and the two of them were hung underneath a bridge over the Canadian River. And what you see is the picture was taken by somebody in a boat out in the river looking up at the bridge, and you see the bodies hanging there underneath this truss bridge with a metal framework over the top of it. And then standing on the bridge is a crowd of about 50 or so white people in nice clothes, like it's a Sunday outing or something, and they're just standing around talking to each other, looking out over the river. And there are men, women, and children, all ages represented. And that photograph has driven me throughout my career to ask, how does this picture change? What do you do to wake up the white folk on the bridge, and those who so easily either take human life or ignore that it's taken? And so I've done a lot of thinking about that, and I think we're we're a socially dissociated society, that our society is so violent that we not only take means to avoid looking at scenes of violence, our own violence, we anesthetize ourselves, etc. But I think we are also kind of like ignorant of what we're doing, because on a deep social neurobiological level, we can't see it. And so I love the quote that Nadine said about yielding to the truth. And I've been thinking lately about the truth in terms of the Quaker testimony of integrity, and the idea that integrity is synonymous with wholeness. And it's not just, truth is not just about accuracy, but it's about completeness, it's about wholeness. And you don't have the truth until all the stories are gathered together. The diversity of all persons within any given picture is recognized and protected, and given an opportunity for voice. I liked what Nadine said then about somebody saying, just a second, not to think about, maybe I don't know what the terminology was that she was using, but activism as confrontation, but as illumination. But I think of activism as more than that, which is an attempt to complete the wholeness of any situation, and so invite every voice that's relevant into that and into relationship, which means, yeah, and I just feel like multiplying the voices, giving, especially, of course, giving those voices that are oppressed the foreground, but also always holding out a hand of invitation to those who are oppressing to join. I think that's perhaps how I think about how to accomplish lasting change. And so you have to, within that process, have to create institutions that guarantee that those voices that have been left out and who have been oppressed are respected and given their rightful equitable space. So first you've got to give them, you actually have to give them, you have to give them the opportunity to be heard in some way, and then you have to institutionalize that. And so I think our institutions need to change big time. Like our criminal justice system is very, very much linearly oriented, based on accusations, adjudications, and punishment. And it needs to become more circularly oriented, which brings in all of the parties that are relevant to any kind of breach to our social fabric to have a voice and to bring about more peaceful conclusion to the problem that's presented. So we have a long way to go, because we think in highly individualistic terms. We think in linear terms, problem solving that ignores the multiplicity of externalities of others who are involved or unrecognized in any given situation. We've got to change our institutions so as to create space for all those folks in order for there to be real justice.
Thanks, Walter. Other thoughts?
I guess we can see that in that very large sense of witness being either something very dramatic that we do, or very, very much um, as you know, as public, kind of thing. But actually, for me, it's the daily things that are hardest to keep that witness going. And I, it's I guess I've had a long life of witnessing to peace and justice. But it's the small things sometimes that have made that are that seem more important um, than the larger things, and it's the things that I feel like I've done in community, meaning that I've tested whether my truth was there before I stuck my foot out and started to do something that might not be popular. And I think that's one of the special things that Quakers have to bring to the whole issue of witness, because um, witness can look like um, it can be, the single individual out there uh, pushing for some point um, without having tested it with the community. And I think that it's actually in empowering other people that I think I do my witness best. Um, it's in helping other people to do their witness, and that's Walter says that requires institutions that help people to do that, and it's in teaching nonviolence and things that I've done most of my witness. I've, and I've always felt very supported by friends because I've asked for help in doing those things. So uh, when you sit there in and you have that experience of knowing uh, that you have some of the truth to share, um, uh, and then you test it, and then people recognize it and support it. I think it's so much stronger. Um, so, and that has been my experience. Um, I've been a released friend to do peace work in the past, and I've been released by some, organizations that um, have allowed me to do work. And but some of the things that I've done that felt when I've really felt like I've really um, convinced somebody have been really small things. Not when I really felt that somebody has made a real change in their lives because of something that I have modeled or done. And a lot of it, I think, is in modeling. Modeling, doing integrity, modeling integrity, which is hard to do. It really is. I mean, I was a tax resistor for a long time. I'm not a tax resistor anymore. Um, I had to give that up, and it has never felt quite right. Um, but in order, it's a compromise, and we make all those sort of military tax resistor, not a tax resistor because I didn't want to support the government. Um, the it it's a hard thing, witness. Um, and but also we can't do everything, and that's one of the things I think is really important to remember, that all of us have to play some role, and sometimes it's only just being on a clearness committee or a support committee for somebody. Sometimes that's the most important role you can play, in witnessing what they're doing. And in this meeting, we have a whole bunch of people who are going to death row, and meeting with prisoners, and I try to support them as much as I can. It seems like it's not something I'm led to do, but I am led to support their ministry, and am ready to be to support them in that. So, and I'm sure that our meeting is witnessing by with our COVID funds, which makes me very, you know, very pleased to think that we are able to do that. And we're witnessing constantly by supporting Carol and Paul in Columbia. But those are ways in which we're being support people rather than being out there doing that work of, lifting people up from oppression. So I think that's part of what it's about to be a Quaker, and what Quaker Witness is about. And excuse me for the rooster in the background. He's our neighbors.
Irene.
Yeah, I liked in the video when it said spirit moving within us. I've always tried to find the will of God. Is that pretty much the same thing within me, to do?
Yeah, that's, I really like the first part of that where she talked about the experiment of the spirit moving within us, which says to me that we have to try and sometimes fail and try again, in order to effect change. I also really appreciated hearing the first part of the George Fox quote, which is, as Nadine put it, the uncomfortable part. And I think she's trying to encourage us to lean into that discomfort, and acknowledge that in some cases what we're doing is we're illuminating what she says is degenerative, and in some cases we're working towards what's regenerative. But there's both of these kinds of types of actions in the world, and the experimental nature of it, is just reassuring to hear, spoken of the way she did, because Irene, as you point out, the forces arrayed against us are vast and powerful. One of the things which, Melissa Ruff shared once was, the idea that it maybe isn't so much about how much real change we can affect with our specific actions, but it's maybe more about who we are as individuals and as a community, and that also is reassuring, I think.
Well,
Liz.
and one of the things that I realized that Nadine didn't emphasize, which I think for me comes from John Wallman, but also from other friends, is that love is always the first motion. That if it isn't coming from love, if it's coming from that place of anger or hate or whatever, and John Wallman tested whether things came from love always over and over again with other people, and with just being in worship, and sort of, I always like the idea of arguing with God. No, you don't really want me to do that, do you really, God? You really couldn't want me to do that. And so arguing, that arguing thing until you're really sure. But love always being the first motion, and as soon as it looks like it's not love and it's maybe ego, that's a time to back off and reconsider what you're doing.
Personally, my own life, I spent years working in the public school system and working with special needs kids, and I got to a point where it burned me out, physically, emotionally, spiritually, in so many ways, and so there's that, analogy or metaphor of being on an airplane, and when a disaster occurs, the mask comes down and they say, when you're there with the child, you're supposed to put the mask on yourself before you put the mask on the child. And you take care of, it seems selfish and counterintuitive, but, and I've spent the last 2 or 3 years doing a lot of introspection and personal work, and kind of removing myself from the world in a lot of ways, but I needed that. I feel like I needed that. And then COVID happened, and it just added to that kind of introspective quality of pulling away. And maybe we all needed that. Maybe that was something that's occurred in our culture that's and forcing us to take that kind of a stance and look at our own selves. But then recently I've been thinking, like, I really do need to step up my game, and feeling a little bit of guilt, and wanting to get involved, if nothing else, but for maybe the letter writing to people in prison and death row, just being a friend, and understanding. So where they're coming from, somebody that's in that predicament position. But it does make it hard with COVID and the fact and working a lot of mandatory overtime hours, and that kind of thing. Just the requirements of the world, that force us to, do our everyday duty, as I don't know, generic citizens, I guess.
Daniel, I feel the same way you felt, but I feel it now because during COVID, I felt like I was busier than everybody else that is, in their homes or whatever. Plus, also the election time. So I got so overwhelmed, I quit all my clubs and everything. So that's where I'm at right now, trying, like what you're saying, getting back into things.
Do others, perhaps folks who haven't shared yet, have thoughts on the video or the concept of witness?
Something I wonder about, Jim, you'd mentioned that, and everyone I'm sure was struck by that, the first part of the quote from George Fox that people like to quote, that sort of ends with, and then walk cheerfully over the earth. But the first part's all about really just being, honestly, the language in that is extremely confrontational. That one is supposed to be very, very, direct, like a terror. It's really not about being conciliatory at all. And it's sort of an interesting contrast with a lot of the conversations we've been having within this meeting lately. I think back to several of the forums we've done on like the values diversity and how to sort of talk to people who have sort of different sets of political values. Also like conversations like Braver Angels, which is in trying to induce greater civility. Also, I remember at a South Central Yearly Meeting, one of the forums there that I attended was on LARA, the Listen, Affirm, Respond, and Add, sort of a tactic of nonviolent communications. And all of these things sort of share a similar strategy of like trying to de-escalate any sort of confrontation you have with another person, even if they're like horrifically wrong. You want to try to sort of, it's sort of the inverse strategy of the early Friends, I guess, or George Fox, where you just like show up at their church and totally shut down the meet, try to shut down the service, which is not at all what we're doing now. Yeah, which I don't know, is that just not something that works in our world, or if we are, there is a difference there. There's a very deep difference there in approach, and I'm not sure what to make of that difference. If that's just an anachronism, his confrontationalism, or like, or a feature of the past that is not applicable now, or if we should be more confrontational. I honestly don't know.
I think what's needed is a dialogue between, just like Better Angels, a controlled dialogue, because it's so spread apart, structured.
Well, there was at South Central meeting too that I forgot the lead speaker. What was her name? Eileen or something like that. Where she worked with. There was, she was involved in a direct action with I forgot what the group was called. Earth something.
Earth Quaker Action Group.
Yeah, Earthquake Action Group.
Team.
Where they were, actually going into banks and financial institutions and doing sit-ins and saying, we're going to sit here until somebody listens to us, basically, and getting very creative with the way they were approaching how to call out, some of these institutions and create change.
Did it work? Did they get success?
Yeah.
Yes, very much so.
They stopped mountaintop coal mining, basically.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
So there are people out there doing very creative and very active, types of work, and again, I wonder about, how during the 60s, many of the freedom riders were young people, and they were kids that had that they had the stamina for one thing, and they had the time and effort. It wasn't, so I don't want to use that as an excuse, but I just wonder, how much, again, it seems like with myself, how much time do I have to put into those types of efforts? And should I feel guilty that I'm not doing more? Or is it those little things, like Liz said, that sometimes make a difference, on a day-to-day basis? Letter writing to somebody in prison or jail, anybody can do that. Can find, 30 minutes or something. So, yeah, and spirit leads you to, because you can't do everything, where does the spirit lead you to as a call to action? And somebody like Walter, who's made it his life's work, to, work in the justice system to make, huge amounts of change where he can. So again, I just, it's something I wonder about.
Steve.
Like most people my age in the 60s, we were called upon to march and protest and resist the Vietnam War and related activities. A good friend of mine, a Quaker friend, was involved with a Brandywine Peace Initiative that took upon themselves to at least once a week go to a factory near Philadelphia where nuclear weapons were being worked upon and pour blood on the ground or simulated blood, and were arrested multiple times and didn't stop the nuclear weapons, but certainly raised the issue and the public view and understanding of what was happening in our backyard. A couple times in my life, I've been called to help organize actions. They both happened to be involving school boards who were out of control and trampling over people. And I have to kind of second Liz's comments that it's very important when you feel motivated to act in some way, whether it's just organizing, signing petitions, printing up signs, whatever, that you test that call to action with others, other people who are spirit-led, because otherwise it's very easy to go off on an ego trip and accomplish something that may not be what you wanted to accomplish at all. So, but the other thing I think in relation to Daniel's comments recently is each person has to find their own way. There is no answer. Each person has to look inside when becoming aware of an issue, whatever that issue is, and think about it and meditate on it and pray on it and decide whether it's something you can invest some of your time and energy in. And that's what we mean by being led by the Spirit within. Everybody does it differently. Everybody has a different capacity for doing different things. But your individual leading should come from your, again, what Jim has honed in on here, your experimental engagement with the Spirit within will lead you to what you're capable of and what you're best suited to.
Walter. Oh, Liz, go ahead, Liz.
I was just going to say maybe we should move to, if everybody, not everybody has spoken, but if everybody who has, we should move to talking a little bit about the Quaker organizations, just for those who don't have a real clear idea of it, because that's one of the parts of Quakerism 101 that we need to, and we can go back to conversation about this if we have time.
Thank you. You want to say something about FCNL since you're so closely involved?
Well, I can make Larry do that because he is more closely involved than I am right now. But FCNL is a group that started in 1943 and during the Second World War as I'm going to need help here, I guess. A nonpartisan, basically, lobby in the public interest and out of faith, basically. It was the first one that was on Capitol Hill, and they basically have either by having lobbyists, Quaker lobbyists, or most recently by working to get everybody, Quakers across the country and others, to do the lobbying because the situation has really changed. when I say lobbying, I don't mean the kind of lobbying where you go in and say, we'll give you, $50 million for your campaign if you pass this law. It's lobbying right now about about a number of issues, immigration, all the issues you'd assume, and they do that in coalition. Basically, there's a staff in DC, and they organize a lot of the lobbying and do some of the lobbying. There are lobbyists there too, but they do a lot of analysis and help us to be able to lobby. And so, there's you can find fcnl.org. You will find all kinds of information about current issues, and it's usually very up to date, and it's also it has a lot of integrity. It's known by the Congress to have a lot of integrity. And they have a whole thing where you can write a letter to your congressman, where you can find out who your congressmen, your senators are, and direct the letter to them on a specific issue. And they give you a suggestion as to what to write on that. And so there's there's email writing campaigns. We don't write letters anymore. We write email. If you don't write a letter because it's going to go through some machine in Ohio that's going to make it unreadable, because they're still worried about checking actual paper letters. So, and you can also call your congressman's office. We often speak to staff rather than the member themselves. And we build relationships with those staff, and if we can, with the member. My congressman is Lloyd Doggett, and we have a pretty good relationship, but mostly with one of the women in his office who I continue to talk to, and there's also a guy in his office who we know each other at this point. And so when I have a question or I have a need, I can go to them. So FCNL has really grown since 1943, when it had one employee, and it basically seeks. They're the we seeks. We seek to a world without war. Larry, can you help me here? I can look it up, but anyway, I don't think it's important. The point is, fcnl.org will tell you a lot about what FCNL does, and they're really helpful.
So I could add that there are advocacy groups, FCNL advocacy groups all over the country, and there's one locally, and we are meeting with Cornyn's office on Thursday, June 3rd at 12:30. And you can tune in with us if you want. It's a Zoom meeting. The other thing is the issues that FCNL addresses are actually generated by the unprogrammed meetings under the umbrella of FCNL. No, I'm sorry, not only unprogrammed, but programmed meetings as well. The local meetings will hold threshing sessions on issues and forward what they've threshed to FCNL for consideration. And right now there is a primary focus on having Congress rescind the two authorizations for the use of military force, 2001 and 2002, and with a special emphasis on 2002. We're making some headway there, but it's difficult. I personally have had some success in this advocacy. A few years ago, the primary focus was auditing the Pentagon. The Pentagon was the only agency that hadn't been audited out of all the, 19 agencies, 17 or 19 agencies. And there was a bill in Congress to have the Pentagon audited. Dana Blanton and I, as you know, there are 5 congressional districts in Austin. So whenever we advocate with a particular congressman, it's usually someone from that district who goes there. And there are only 2 on the advocacy team from my congressman's district, Roger Williams, That was Dana Blanton and myself, and we went to advocate with Adam, who was a fresh out from Texas State in political science. It was, I think there were only two other people in the office. One of them was a receptionist. So we advocated with him for the audit to the Pentagon bill, and he kind of glazed over while we were talking to him. So Dana and I talked about it later, and we thought, we're not going to get anywhere with Adam. He's too new and he's too uninterested. So I found out about a military liaison that Roger Williams had in Cleburne. And so Dana and I made an appointment to go see him when we drove the 200 miles up there. And by the way, it's quite enlightening to see the amount of poverty there is in Roger Williams' district. Here in Austin, it's pretty good. We're fairly affluent here, but when you drive through those little towns on the way to Cleburne, you see a lot of poverty and towns vanishing. Cleburne, on the other hand, is fairly affluent, it being an exurb of Fort Worth. So we told the liaison about the audit the Pentagon bill. He hadn't heard of it. And he had his assistant go off and research it, and she came back and said that, well, there are only 60 representatives who have sponsored it. And he said, well, you need at least 100 representatives before a bill goes anywhere. And we said, well, how about Roger Williams being the 61st? And then we talked about how there are something like 25,000 service members or their families members in Roger Williams' district, and how the way funds are allocated for the Pentagon directly affect their standard of living. And then we told him we would call back in 2 weeks to see what the congressman said. I called back 2 weeks later, and he said, well, the congressman hadn't heard of that bill either, but he's going to support it. So we were able to make a small change in the way things are done through persistence and some effort. So I feel very gratified by my efforts with FCNL, and I encourage everyone who has a bent that way to join us.
Thank you.
I'm in Roger Williams District 2 in Lago Vista.
Come and join us.
I just, while we're on the subject of SCNL, I posted a New York Times essay about, it was, I think, back in 2012, about the Republican Party's shift away from the truth, basically. That was so already, an intentional move that laid the groundwork for Trump, who just excelled at the strategies that were already present there. And it's like, I just thought I'd share that because I thought it's like when we're trying to bring in those folks who are, we consider to be, not being oppressive or not engaging in the truth. Maybe it might be helpful at some point with some folks in some conversations to take a meta look at what's going on and try to help them see that the world in which they live has been strategically constructed for them. And so that's why I shared that.
Maybe we should go on and talk about AFSC a little bit, American Friends Service Committee. I don't know if Terry's actually there or not. Terry worked for AFSC for 15 years, and I only worked for AFSC for 10 years. But we both know quite a bit about the service committee. We've been on, there he is. We've been on service committees, and we did, when we moved to Austin, there was an AFSC office here. that was doing peace education and immigration work. It is turned into Austin Town Circa now, but you don't have to have an office right here to get involved with AFSC. They have a lot of good programs, and one of the things they're doing is on the Middle East, and we probably don't want to get into that whole issue right now, but they've been one of the groups that has been trying to teach people about our American involvement financially in what's going on in between Israelis and Palestinians, the Israeli government and the Palestinians and the oppression of the Palestinians, and how complicit we are in this country with that. Another issue that AFSC has been working really hard on is anti-racism, and been involved in the Black Lives Matter movement. They have a lot of good information and educational information online, and both Terry and I were field people, or regional, not even regional, area people for the service committee in a variety of capacities. Do you have anything you want to say about AFSC? It's started in 1917 as with the ambulance corps, and it's got a staff in a variety of places in the country. Where we have there's a southern regional office that we relate to, which the Jacob Flowers from that office is often at our yearly meeting. Anything else, Terry, that you want to say? You have to unmute. You have to unmute in order to say it.
Well, I should say you could talk for the next couple hours, but I think we got the basics here. Rufus Jones might be interesting. Rufus Jones was one of the primary people involved in getting the service committee started. It was really around relief after the war, and it sort of grew from a relief group into a group that does advocacy and international relations and all kinds of things from that experience, and had program in the United States as well as around the world.
And they were awarded a Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah, we also we participated in a project that won an Academy Award.
Yes.
Too. It was the film about Witness to War, about Vietnam, and I worked a little bit
Central
on that
America,
project.
Terry, not.
Oh yeah, right.
Central America.
I'm so sleepy. Anyway, I like to say it's the only group that has won the Nobel Peace Prize and the Academy Award. Well, it wasn't really, the Academy Award was granted to the group that did the film, and we just played a role in it. So
one of our friends had to go and receive it, and both with the Nobel Peace Prize and the Academy Award, there was some problem in finding the appropriate clothing of the person who was going to receive it, because Quakers in general don't dress like that. So.
Right. Rufus had to go to the material aids department to get.
Yeah, he went to the material aids department. The AFSC has always collected clothing and redone it and sent it abroad, and so he went down there to find his tuxedo.
They did send the tuxedo along with the refugee camp, so it was.
Well, I can't even remember the name of the friend who received it, but his suit definitely.
Dave Goodman. It was Dave Goodman with Merrimack.
Yeah. Anyway, fun.
Walter, you had your hand raised.
Just wanted to add that Howard Hawley and I were on, and I don't know if Liz, you were involved too. At some point, we were on the advisory board for the local AFSC office here in Austin that was here for many years. And back in the financial crash, 2007 or 8, AFSC restructured stuff all around the country in order to survive, basically. And they, in doing so, they had to cut out the Austin office entirely. But when that happened, Austin Ton Circa, which had been a sub program of the Austin office, then went off on its own, and it's housed in the little house at our meeting house, on our meeting house grounds now, and is continuing the work of working with women who are involved in factory work just on the other side of the border with Mexico. And that work goes on. So that's just wanted to mention that was an outgrowth of the Austin AFSC office, and it's really it's
my start was working with the Austin area office in the early 70s before I got hired by AFSC in Portland, and then circulated around the country until I finally wound up back here.
So
I like the discussion by Nadine about bearing witness as having a structure. She talks about it coming out of an outward focus to reflect your inward experience or your relationships with others and with the natural world, or with the experiment of the spirit moving through you. And it's also true, though, that there's a structure that we can involve ourselves in through FCNL or AFSC or some other Quaker service organizations as a way to build relationships that will help provide that support that Liz was talking about as being part of a supportive community for actions that are being undertaken collectively, or ways to see if, for instance, as Larry has shared, if it's possible to try some of this kind of one-on-one lobbying out with a small group. The other kind of collective or structure that for bearing witness is, of course, the meeting itself. And there has been a variety of ways in which Friends Meeting of Austin has kind of, as a corporate body, if I could use that term, sort of stood in witness from minutes that have been passed recently to close work with the sanctuary movement in the 1980s and early 90s, to the prison ministry and work with death row in Huntsville and Polunsky. And so the community that we're all a part of is actively engaged as well. And the COVID Fund is another example. But does anyone want to say a little bit about what it's like to come together collectively as a meeting to bear witness in the world? Because we've talked a little bit about doing it as individuals. We've talked a little bit about doing it, in the context of these national and international organizations. But what about closer to home in Austin?
Jim, I can tell you, first off, I'm sorry I was late. I kind of missed that first query a little bit. But some really, really, really good points that were made during the discussion that really, really resonated with me. The discussion about integrity, it's not just accuracy, it's also wholeness. And I think part of witness is standing witness to that wholeness of the truth and not relenting to allowing that truth to be bent or to be changed. to me is part of witnessing. And that can be, I think Liz was talking about, it can be as simple as conversations. That can be part of it. But you know, one thing so the question about witnessing as a community, as a faith community, you know, the only thing I wanted to say there is, you know, as far as activism, as far as rallies and whatnot, you know, obviously I've been out quite a bit to Georgetown, the county seat where I live, in protest of the Confederate monument that's there, and that started to move towards more. It started to move away from a group of people that were unified against the concept and acts of racism, and more towards we're against people that we deem are racist, such as people that wear Confederate uniforms. And that may or may not be true, but it isn't about the racist, it's about racism. And the whole point of saying this is, as a community, I look forward to that, because on Wednesday night, there were 3 of us out at the Capitol, and to have that sense of our presence in a vigil, rally, whatever you wish to call it, but it also being a sense of worship, it was done in a sense of worship, was a lot different than the times that I've been in Georgetown. I hadn't experienced that as deeply, so I guess I'm encouraging, is what I'm saying, or looking for opportunities.
Walter.
Just a quick follow-up thought on that. I was really impressed with the Standing Rock protest some years ago, because it was organized around the idea of worship. There, you know, I don't remember exact terminology that was used, but it was like that was central. And they, you know, there were like elders who were. I went up there for a day. We delivered. A friend of mine and I delivered some heaters, gas heaters to folks there, so they could survive the winter. So we did a quick 24-hour drive up there and dropped them off. We happened to be there when the Army Corps of Engineers made its announcement that it was going to stop things or whatever for a while. So there was a lot of jubilation going on in the camp. But there was a section of it that was, you know, elders that were in prayer about everything that was going on. And so there was a mindfulness about that covered the entire project. It was stunning. And the other thought is that you know, integrity is something it's only one of the spices of Quakerism, and it's really helpful to think of it in the context of all the others, of community, of simplicity, equality, the environment. All these things are you know, part of this whole that we're holding up, and this being together. And so whenever we're in meeting, we're modeling, you know, that should be intentionally modeling that world that we want to see. And that goes for protests out in the world as well.
Liz.
You know, that vigil, the silent vigil, is really, for me, it's a very special thing. It's hard for other people to do, but I think because of being in meeting for worship a lot and stuff, the fact is that's very powerful. It's often the way that Quakers protest, and sometimes when you're protesting in front of the White House, it can feel really, with a large group of Quakers in a vigil, it can feel very powerful and really pretty oppositional in some ways, and but with that, not oppositional in the sense that anybody can come and stand with you. Anybody can, join that, and you're not throwing a lot of words at other people. You're not in the midst of telling them what to do. It's always upset me in demonstrations, some of the chanting and things, because chanting basically, excludes some people by what you're saying, and the silence really is a better protest for me, particularly, and it's something Quakers have to bring to the whole picture. So, and I can't help but think that it's kind of neat that we're not the only religion that uses it. I mean, Catholics also do vigils, but and probably others too. But the native folks have it right. The other thing is that our organizations are run in the way that with our business meeting, our business meeting process. And that, I think, is really important to remember. And I think FCNL is a very good example of that, of not only do they run their business meeting like we run our business meeting, their annual meeting, but also they gather the thoughts of, they gather the sense of the meeting of all the friends that they can get to respond in order to decide how they're going to prioritize what they're going to be doing. And that, I think, it's often the AFSC has had a hard time doing that. Hasn't got a good process to do that, which I wish it did. Now, Friends Peace Teams is something we haven't mentioned. An international group that's teaching nonviolence all over the world, and corollary to it is Alternative to Violence Project, and we have done. Our meeting has supported work at the Bastrop Federal Prison, doing alternatives to violence, and that is an incredibly special thing to do if you ever want to get involved and become a trainer. You go into the prison and you spend some intensive time, an entire weekend basically, working with the prisoners, and then there's a basic course, and then there's an advanced course, and then there's a training for trainers. And eventually you've trained the guys in the prison to do the training. And they will only require one person from the outside when they have a training, and they can do it themselves. And this is run through many, many state prisons and the federal prison system as a way for people to get along in that very tight situation. Of living so close to each other, and to understand that violence does not create the kind of world we want to have. And even if it's a matter of sharing the washing machine, which it often is, but it's amazing to watch these guys, and I've only done it with guys, suddenly realize that they have the power. They have the power themselves, not to have an argument about who's using the washing machine when, and not to have constant conflict within their lives. And they wonder why they didn't see that before, and oh boy, they're going to use it when they get out again. I mean, it's really quite special. So I invite you to consider that. There's a couple of us who are still doing that, and we hope to go back to Bastrop Federal Prison. Glenn and I, from this meeting, have been doing that work.
Walter.
Sorry, I'm being pretty talky. I'm trying to keep it short, though, whenever I do. Quaker Earth Care Witness, we haven't mentioned, I don't think. Although we did I think mentioned some of the work, kind of protest work was done in Philadelphia. But it's a very vibrant, active organization on behalf of the environment. And there's also the Quaker Institute for the Future, which is kind of a spin-off perhaps of Quaker Witness, which is it's a bunch of people that come together every 2 years or something to work on some deep thinking about the environment, economy, and creating a sustainable future. And there's also a QNO, Quaker United Nations organization, which does amazing it's like FCNL on an international level in a way. They use some of the same techniques in terms of bringing people together who are on opposite sides of positions to have quiet conversations and so forth. And they do that in Geneva. And they also have an office in New York, and they're wonderful.
They're part of AFSC. They're part of the AFSC.
It's part of AFSC? Mm-hmm. Okay.
That's right.
Yeah.
You're an AFSC project.
Yeah. But it's, that's just organizational. It's not.
But they have their own independent life, really.
Yeah, they have a very
many
separate
programs in AFSC do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to mention something else that
I just wanted to say a little word about the sanctuary movement. When we were talking about Friends meetings and their involvement in that, I know Austin meeting was, but I wasn't here at the time. We moved to North Carolina, and I had been deeply involved in Central American sanctuary movement via the service committee. But this time it was my own meeting that was becoming a sanctuary congregation. And that's a unique experience because a meeting in that situation has to decide to take on, put itself under legal jeopardy. So everyone has to consider the consequences very carefully. And it was never easy. And one of my memories of great moments in Quakerism is the meeting where we finally decided. Edith Mackey, who was, if not the oldest member of the meeting, quite elderly, and had deep roots in Quakerism in North Carolina and internationally too, really, just said, folks, this is something we just have to do. We just have to do it. And it was as though everyone said, yes, ma'am.
Well, what she said was that, this may be the law of the land, but it's God's law that we have to. It's God's law that we have to obey, not the law of the land. And if it's necessary to break the law of the land to obey God's law, then we just have to do it. And as Terry said, it was during a threshing session. If people were at the threshing session the other week, and it just sort of like turned the whole thing from
Right.
just.
So there were two things, with becoming a sanctuary congregation. First of all, we had to come together in the spirit as a Friends congregation, and then we had to welcome the victims of war into our lives. People from another culture, from a very different experience, and I know from my other work in the sanctuary movement at the time that was never easy. That was something that friends and other people involved in this sort of thing had to adjust to and struggle with. So in general, it was, these things that make real demands on the meeting. And you can't create that situation artificially. They just happen, right? But sometimes the things that challenge us the most are the things that change us the most for the better.
So I would just add to that the Austin meeting was the only sanctuary church in Austin, during the first sanctuary movement, only congregation. Those of us who were here then, or there then, I think look back on that as an extraordinary time when, as Terry described, the meeting came together as one, and the decision to take the risk, the open confrontation with the government, all of that was extraordinarily, once the decision was made, extraordinarily unifying and invigorating. And we've had some times in the course of the meeting since then where we've addressed other big issues, like gay marriage, for example, was involved the same kind of deep, conversation and thought and prayer and so forth. But didn't require the same kind of, once we made a decision on that, not the same kind of an open sort of confrontation with the system, which was also changing at this,
It wasn't, Walter. It wasn't. In order to marry same-sex couples, you have to break the law when you did it. I mean, I know that's basically it was breaking the law. To call it marriage, actually.
Right, under the care of the meeting when we did that, yeah. But it wasn't like we didn't put a sign out front. This is like we did with the sanctuary movement. We had a sign, I think, of some sort. We weren't that sort of confrontational with the issue. The death penalty, we've just been a constant presence. We've written letters to the Board of Pardons and Paroles since I think about 2005, and copied those letters to the governor. Every execution date, almost. We've missed some, but in the course of that time. But our intention has been to try to get everyone. And the ongoing work at death row. That's probably perhaps our most unified ministry with the most involvement of members of the meeting at this point.
I like, Chip, hearing what you had to say about the difference between a political protest and a worshipful protest, or a vigil that is spirit-led and one that is not. And so I think, one of the things that I've been thinking about is the kind of collective worship that we engage in, and how that leads the meeting to engage in specific activities collectively. And of course, we hope that our efforts are spirit-led. And I liked Quakerism 101 on business meeting, where the emphasis was made by Steve at that meeting that this is a meeting for worship with attention to business. And so to have, this, Nadine talks about the experiment of the work of spirit moving through us, but in our lives, but there's the pathways that takes for each of us separately as individuals, but there's also a pathway that takes for us collectively when we come together. And it's just it's the same and different at the same time. I don't know what to say about it except that it's a remarkable thing.
I was wondering too, when you said before to not do things alone, but in a group, because sometimes I've been moved to go do things alone, but then I end up in a group. Like I forget what year it was, but I belonged to the American Nurses Association. So I knew there was something I wanted to say to congressmen in Washington. And I know the nurses get a group from every state and go to Washington. And I signed up for it. And at the time, I only had an associate's degree. So I went there and they were very nice, but I didn't know they were all going to be PhDs and master's degree nurses. And we went and we saw different Congress people. But after they had 4 things they wanted to tell them. And when we got to the end of the 4 things, I would say, oh, by the way, and I would add the one thing I wanted. But I don't know. But they were very supportive. And that's why I went back to school to get a BSN from what I experienced doing that. But I sometimes think, you know, you have to be led singly to do something, not just in a group.
Larry?
Yeah, I will defer if someone wants to respond to that first, but I just wanted to say that before we had the discussion of marrying gay people, we had a discussion a couple of years before that about whether or not to admit gay people to Friends meeting. And I remember a discussion at South Central Yearly Meeting Gathering one time where a woman said, well, I just don't, it was a Semitic question. I just don't want to give up the idea that I'm a gay person. I'm a happy person. I like being gay and I just don't want to give that up. And I thought, well, you may be a gay person, but any hope of you having a sense of irony has left.
Oh dear. I did want to mention that there is a tradition that goes back all the way to the 17th century in Quakerism called releasing a friend or being under the weight of a leading. And that's where you have an individual leading to go and do something, either as one's own personal initiative, but you look for the support and the weight of the meeting when you do that. And the process is to come before the meeting. And in old Quaker parlance, it's the meeting tests whether the person is truly under the weight of a leading, right? So it's a spiritual process in which it's recognized that we might have notions and we might have leadings that are much more powerful, and whether the meeting can unite with the work of the individual. And then sometimes they go and do whatever it is they're doing with maybe a traveling minute or a letter recognizing that they are doing the work of the meeting that they have been, or maybe material support to do it, and thus the term release friend. Much of everything that John Wallman did was in the service of the meeting and went through this whole process of being released.
Well, we just had an example of that with the Peace and Social Concerns Committee, with having Andrea Bean come to us and say, I really feel led to travel up to the to be with the on the pipeline thing, which she talked about it at meeting, and we all agreed that she could ask the meeting for the cost of the plane fare or other expenses that she might have. And so I think that's, we didn't test her leading because we know her leading has been steady on that, and she's been working on that issue for a long time. So, but you know, her leading in that has been tested and affirmed and over and over again. So I think that you know, it's a good example of a friend who has an individual leading, but it also is something that the meeting definitely unites with.
Yeah. And it's that correspondence between the leading of an individual and the leading of and the unity of the meeting that's really interesting.
Larry?
Yeah, I think the origin of this process was discussed earlier in one of the Quakerism 101 sessions. And that's when it originated when John Naylor got on the back of a donkey on Palm Sunday and rode into, was it Bristol? On the back of a donkey in imitation of Jesus's action on Palm Sunday. And that nearly led to the demise of Quakers because that was considered blasphemous, and there was a lot of oppression of Quakers after that.
Well, that's a complicated historical moment, and it led to a lot of structuring of Quakerism, mostly on the initiative of George Fox. But there were mixed interpretations about what Naylor was about, and some of the surviving interpretation is that he went off on the deep end, but probably he didn't. I mean, there's a lot to be said for the legitimacy of what he was doing, and anyway, Naylor gets a bad rap, and I like to speak up for the guy.
I just want to go back to what, oh, go ahead, Walter. I wanted to go back to what Walter said about the wholeness thing again. It just seems like so much of, well, I mean, the term restorative justice comes to mind, and that whole idea of wholeness, and you know, having a clearness committee and having others there to support, to go to and support what you're doing or what you're being led to do in the world. It just seems intuitive. And I just think that it's an interesting approach. And then the word forgiveness comes to mind for some reason, you know, again, with restorative justice. How do we become this whole, not just individuals, but people as a community, that idea of wholeness.
I think critical to that is having structures that are able to contain conflict. You know, the wholeness is lost whenever attempts are made to eliminate conflict. And I was wondering, something Chip said a while back really caught my attention, which was he seemed to be saying that the nature of the protests up in Georgetown have shifted away from a focus on criticizing white supremacy and the legacy of Confederacy and so forth to focus on criticizing individual racists. That's what I thought I heard. I was wondering if the nature of the protests have become difficult for a Quaker to participate in, if that's kind of what you might have been saying, Chip, and just thought I'd raise that issue of how we as Quakers at times have, well, we're always relating to others who are involved in protest as well, and how you know, sometimes it's difficult.
Yeah, I mean that's a great question, and I think the answer is yes. It made me uncomfortable. You know, we've talked here about in fact, even in forum it came up several times, and it has in this meeting too, about testing actions and testing the world against the measure of love. And you know, I mean, I have to say, let me back up. You know, it was very encouraging to me when we saw the Southwestern University students coming out, because they actually had a role in the placement of that monument. So it was really kind of nice to see. But then, you know, and I think Liz talked about, you know, chants don't bother me as much as long as they're musical and they're not filled with hate. They're okay, but they started, you know, again, it seemed like it was focused more from a regime of protesting you as other individuals rather than I'm seeing that of God within you. I don't like what you're doing or what you're wearing, but it was coming from the wrong spot. So it became a lot more comfortable to me to stay involved with that, with some of the people who are friends, and going out and getting petitions signed and talking to individuals as they're coming by. And I think one of the real joys occurred. It was actually several months ago, so it was probably in October. I actually had a person carrying a Donald Trump sign come by and sign the petition for the removal of the monument. So that was after a discussion. So, but I think that's a great point. You have to be sure that what you're there doing and the method that you're doing meets your own leading, your own measure. I mean, some may be more able to cross the line of the law of the land to achieve the laws of God, I suppose. But I think that degree is probably individual, where that comes. But anyway, that's a good question. I think the answer is yes.
Yeah.
And let me say one other thing real quick too, if I can do it real quick here. The thing with the vigil being out there on Wednesday evening, and it was just 3 of us, but the power of it to me, what kind of came to me then, Walter talked about the picture, not the 1911 picture of a lynching, and there's a 1916 picture of a lynching that has affected me and stuck with me. And so being in a worshipful state, maybe in a gloomy worshipful state, I suppose, but it made me realize is there really that much difference between what happened in 1916 and what happened in 2021 today? And I came to the conclusion that there was a lot less difference than people might think. And that told me that the whole idea of bearing witness, we still need to be nudged, and I'll say in the right direction. I'm not sure what the right direction actually is. I guess I try to think about what that is each day, but and that's the value and the purpose and the need for witnessing. Keep moving us as a race, as a species, as a world in the right direction. So I'm gonna stop there. That's pretty philosophical.
But Chip, you pick up on, is it coming from love? Is love the first motion? And if love is the first motion, it isn't so much whether you're breaking the law or not. If love is the first motion to break the law, then that can be the right thing to do. It's whether what you're proposing it has that love that brings in other people, as opposed to sending other people away. And I think that's there's the belief that there's some of the God in all of us, or some of the Spirit in all of us, is basic to Quakerism, and it's basic to our witness too. So I think that's important. That it's really good to hear what you're saying, because it reaffirms for me that it works. Because sometimes I get very depressed that it really isn't. It isn't true. So, but it is. It really works.
That may be a nice note to end on, that love is the first motion, and that, as Chip says, we think every day on what the right direction is, even if we don't know yet in our experiment, to use Nicole's word, even if we don't know what that right direction is.